The stars meant nothing to Admiral Keffer anymore. He had seen too many of them fall under his empire's rule. Standing on the bridge of his massive ship, he watched another world surrender through the main viewing screen. The blue and green. Planet below looked peaceful, but its people had just given up without firing a single shot. This was how it always happened. The Zephyrian Empire would arrive in a new star system with their crystal ships shining like diamonds in space. They would destroy a few military bases to show their power. Then the local government would send a message saying they surrender. It was boring now. Kefver's second officer approached him with a datapad. "Admiral, the Kepler system has also surrendered. That makes 15 star systems this month." The Admiral nodded without much interest. 15 systems in 1 month was actually slow for them. Last year they had taken 30 systems in the same time, but these smaller species were all the same. They saw the crystal ships and lost all hope of fighting back. The Zephyrian ships were not like normal spacecraft. They were made from living crystal that could bend space around them. Energy weapons passed right through them. Physical weapons could not even get close. Most importantly, they had machines that could attack the minds of enemy crews, making them unable to think or move. 3 galaxies had fallen to the Zephyrian Empire in less than 200 years. Millions of different species now served under their rule. Some had tried to fight at first, but none had lasted more than a few days against the Crystal Fleet. Keffer turned away from the viewing screen and walked to his command chair. Bridge around him was made of the same living crystal as the ship's hull. It glowed with soft blue light and seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. His crew of 12 officers worked at stations that grew from the floor like crystal trees. "Set course for the next system on our list," he ordered. His voice echoed strangely in the crystal chamber. "I want to finish this sector before the season ends." "Yes, Admiral," came the reply from his navigation officer. "The next target is called the Alterian system. Intelligence reports show they have 5 planets with life and a small defense fleet." Keffer almost smiled. The Alterians would be no different from all the others. They would see the crystal ships appear in their space, panic for a few hours, then send a surrender message. By tomorrow, another system would belong to the Empire, but far away in space, something different was happening. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his chair on the bridge of the human ship Un's Defiance. His ship was not made of crystal or strange metals. It was built from good old human steel and powered by fusion engines that his grandfather might have understood. Morrison was a tall man with short brown hair and tired eyes. He had been patrolling the outer edge of human space for 6 months, looking for pirates and checking on remote colonies. It was quiet work, but someone had to do it. Lieutenant Ryan Blake, the young communications officer, suddenly looked up from his station with worry on his face. "Captain, I'm getting a distress signal from the Alterian system." Morrison turned in his chair. The Alterians were humanity's best friends in space. They had helped humans learn how to travel between stars. They traded with human colonies and shared their knowledge freely. If the Alterians were in trouble, humans would help them. "Put it on the main screen," Morrison ordered. The message was broken and full of static, but the words were clear enough. An unknown alien force had appeared in Alterian space. They had huge ships that seemed to be made of crystal. They had destroyed 2 Alterian defense stations in seconds. The Alterian government was being told to surrender or face total destruction. Morrison felt a cold feeling in his stomach. He had never heard of these crystal ships before. No human had encountered them in all their years of space travel. But if they could destroy Alterian defenses so easily, they had to be very powerful. Commander Lisa Garrett, his tactical officer, was already working at her station. She was a smart woman with red hair who never panicked in dangerous situations. "Captain, I'm not finding anything about these crystal ships in our databases. This is a completely new threat." Lieutenant Blake raised his hand. Sir, I'm picking up more transmissions. The aliens are calling themselves the Zephyrian Empire. They're demanding that all Alterian forces surrender immediately. Morrison stood up and walked to the center of the bridge. His crew of 25 officers and enlisted personnel looked at him, waiting for orders. The Defiance was just one ship with basic weapons and armor. If these Zephyrians could destroy Alterian defenses, they could probably destroy his ship without much effort. But Morrison thought about his Alterian friends. He remembered Captain Veldar, an Alterian officer who had saved his life during a pirate attack 3 years ago. He thought about the Alterian children he had met on their colony worlds, always excited to meet humans and ask questions about Earth. Set course for the Alterian system, Morrison ordered. Maximum speed. Commander Garrett looked surprised. Captain, we don't know what we're flying into. These aliens sound very dangerous. Morrison nodded. I know, Lisa, but the Alterians are our allies. We can't just leave them to face this alone. What if we can't help them? Asked Lieutenant Blake. What if these Zephyrians are too powerful for us? Morrison looked out at the stars through the main viewing screen. Then at least we'll have tried. Sometimes that's all you can do. The Defiance turned toward the Alterian system and jumped into faster-than-light travel. Behind them, human space continued its normal, peaceful routine. Ahead of them waited an enemy that had conquered 3 entire galaxies. Morrison did not know it yet, but his decision to help his alien friends would change the fate of every living thing in the known universe. The Zephyrian Empire was about to learn that some species would never surrender. No matter how hopeless the situation seemed. In the depths of space, 2 very different ideas of how the universe should work were about to collide. One believed that the strong should rule over the weak. The other believed that friends should help friends, even when it seemed impossible. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see which idea would win. Admiral Kefver stood in his crystal command center, reading reports from his fleet commanders. The numbers were even better than he had expected. In just 3 days, his ships had taken control of 12 star systems in this new galaxy. The local species called it the Milky Way, and it was proving to be the easiest conquest yet. The Admiral's crystal ship was huge, bigger than most space stations. 3,000 other Zephyrian ships flew with him, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. His empire had learned long ago that overwhelming force was the key to quick victory. When people saw how hopeless their situation was, they gave up without wasting time on useless fighting. Commander Velthar, his second in command, walked across the crystal bridge. She was tall and thin like all Zephyrians, with silver skin that reflected the bridge's blue light. Her 4 arms moved gracefully as she carried data tablets and star charts. Admiral, the Alterian system is completely under our control, she reported. Their defense fleet has been disabled by our mind weapons. All military personnel are unconscious, but alive. The planetary governments are ready to sign surrender documents. Kefver nodded with satisfaction. The Alterians had been slightly more advanced than most species in this galaxy, but they had still fallen in less than 6 hours. Their ships had fired a few shots at the Crystal Fleet, but the weapons had passed harmlessly through the Zephyrian vessels. This was the beauty of Zephyrian technology. Their ships existed partly in normal space and partly in another dimension. Energy weapons could not hurt them because the energy had nowhere to go. Physical weapons like missiles and bullets simply passed through empty space where the ships appeared to be. Even better were the mind weapons. The Zephyrians had learned to attack the thoughts and feelings of their enemies directly. One blast from a mind weapon could make an entire ship's crew fall unconscious. Another setting could fill enemy soldiers with such fear that they would run away screaming. The most powerful setting could make people forget how to fight at all. What about the species that built these ships? Kefver asked, pointing to a display showing the Alterian vessels. Do we have information about their allies? Velther checked her data tablet. The Alterians have close ties with a species called humans. According to our intelligence, the humans are primitive but numerous. They have spread to many star systems, but their technology is very basic. They still use chemical rockets and metal. Bullets, Kethver almost laughed. Chemical rockets were the kind of technology his people had used 10,000 years ago. Metal bullets were something from the early Stone Age of space travel. These humans sounded like they had barely learned to leave their home planet. Are any human ships in this area? He asked. Our sensors detected one human vessel approaching the Alterian system, Velther replied. It appears to be some kind of military patrol ship, very small, very weak. It should arrive in about 2 hours. The Admiral waved his hand dismissively. Let it come. The humans will see what happened to their Alterian friends and understand that resistance is pointless. They will probably send a surrender message to their government immediately. This was always how it worked. The Zephyrian Empire would defeat one species in a star system, and their allies would quickly realize they had no chance of winning. Fears spread faster than any weapon, and smart leaders knew when they were beaten. Kethver walked to the great viewing screen that covered one wall of the bridge. Outside, he could see the Alterian home world, a beautiful blue and green planet with 3 moons. Alterian ships floated motionless in space around it, their crews unconscious from the mined weapons. Soon, Zephyrian administrators would arrive to begin organizing the new territory. Meanwhile, the human ship Anne's Defiance was racing through space toward the Alterian system. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the stars streak past as they traveled faster than light. His crew was preparing for whatever they might find when they arrived. Commander Garrett was checking their weapon systems. The Defiance had 20 missile tubes, 10 laser cannons, and basic energy shields. It was good equipment for fighting pirates or defending against small raids, but Morrison knew it would not be enough against an enemy that could defeat the Alterians so easily. Lieutenant Blake was trying to gather more information about these Zephyrians. He had managed to record some of their radio transmissions, but the language was completely unknown. The computer was working to translate the messages, but it would take time. Captain, Blake called out, I'm getting some strange readings from the Alterian system. There are hundreds of large ships there, but they're not showing up clearly on our sensors. It's like they're partly invisible. Morrison frowned. Ships that were partly invisible sounded like very advanced technology. Much more advanced than anything humans had developed. He was beginning to understand why the Alterians had been defeated so quickly. Dr. Helen Parker, the ship's chief science officer, looked up from her station. She was a small woman with gray hair who had spent her life studying alien technology. Captain, these sensor readings don't make sense according to our physics. These ships seem to exist in normal space and somewhere else at the same time. What does that mean for our weapons? Morrison asked. Dr. Parker shook her head. I don't know. Our missiles and lasers are designed to hit targets in normal space. If these ships are partly somewhere else, our weapons might not be able to touch them. The bridge fell quiet as everyone thought about this. They were flying toward an enemy they might not be able to hurt, to help friends who had already been defeated. It seemed like a hopeless situation, but Morrison had made his decision. He would not abandon the Alterians, even if it meant his own ship would be destroyed. Sometimes doing the right thing was more important than surviving. How long until we reach the Alterian system? He asked. 1 hour and 45 minutes, replied the navigation officer. Morrison nodded. All hands, prepare for battle. We may not be able to win, but we're going to try. As the Defiance continued its journey through space, both sides prepared for their first meeting. The Zephyrians expected another easy victory against primitive opponents. The humans expected to face impossible odds with courage and determination. neither side knew that this battle would change everything. The age of easy conquest was about to end, but first, it would reach its highest point. In less than 2 hours, the most powerful empire in 3 galaxies would meet the most stubborn species in the 4th. The universe held its breath and waited to see what would happen next. The UN's Defiance dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Alterian system. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge, staring at the main viewing screen in shock. What he saw was beyond his worst fears. Hundreds of crystal ships surrounded the Alterian planets like a deadly cloud. Each ship was at least 5 times larger than the Defiance. They gleamed with strange light that seemed to bend and twist in ways that hurt to look at. The entire Alterian defense fleet floated motionless in space, their ships dark and silent. "My God," whispered Commander Garrett. "There are so many of them." Lieutenant Blake worked frantically at his communication station. "Captain, I'm trying to contact the Alterian ships, but they're not responding. Their life support systems are still working, but nobody is answering our calls." Blue Parker studied her sensor readings with growing alarm. The Alterian crews appear to be alive but unconscious. Something has put them all to sleep at the same time. I've never seen anything like this. Morrison felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The enemy had defeated an entire fleet without destroying a single ship. Whatever weapon they had used was far beyond human understanding, but he could not turn back now. The Alterians needed help, even if that help came from just one small human ship. "Send a message to the enemy fleet," Morrison ordered. "Tell them, we demand they release the Alterian crews immediately." Blake sent the message on all frequencies. They waited for several minutes, but there was no response. The crystal ships continued to orbit the Alterian worlds, as if the Defiance did not exist. "Try again," Morrison said. "Tell them we represent the human government and we want to negotiate." Again, there was no answer. The enemy ships seemed to consider the Defiance too unimportant to notice. This made Morrison angry. He had come here to help his friends, and these aliens would not even talk to him. Aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Kefvir finally looked at the data about the approaching human ship. It was even smaller and weaker than his intelligence reports had suggested. The vessel carried primitive weapons that would be completely useless against crystal ships. Its crew of 25 humans could be put to sleep with a single blast. "From a mind weapon, should we respond to their messages?" asked Commander Velther. Keffer waved his hand dismissively. "Not yet. Let them see the hopelessness of their situation first. When they understand that their weapons cannot hurt us, they will surrender without wasting our time." The Admiral had used this strategy many times before. Let the enemy make the first move, demonstrate that their attacks were useless, then accept their surrender gracefully. It saved time and prevented unnecessary damage to useful ships and equipment, but Captain Morrison was not planning to attack in any normal way. He called his senior officers to the briefing room for an emergency meeting. The small room was crowded with worried faces as everyone tried to think of a solution to an impossible problem. "We can't fight them with normal weapons," Morrison said. "Our missiles and lasers won't work against ships that exist partly in another dimension. We need a different approach." Commander Garrett pulled up tactical displays on the briefing room screen. "Captain, we do have one experimental weapon that might work. The quantum torpedoes in Cargo Bay 3. Dr. Parker leaned forward with interest. "Those torpedoes were never properly tested. They're designed to exist in multiple states at the same time until they hit their target, but they're extremely dangerous. If something goes wrong, they could tear a hole in space itself." Morrison studied the torpedo specifications. The weapons used advanced quantum physics that he barely understood. Instead of existing in normal space like regular missiles, they existed in many possible places at once. Only when they struck a target would they choose which reality to exist in. Could they hit ships that are partly in another dimension? He asked. Maybe, Dr. Parker replied. If the enemy ships exist in multiple dimensions at once, then weapons that exist in multiple states might be able to reach them. But I can't guarantee it will work. Lieutenant Blake had been quiet during the discussion, but now he raised his hand. Captain, I've been studying the enemy communications. I think I've figured out how their mind weapons work. Everyone turned to look at the young officer. Blake was nervous but determined to share his discovery. The Zephyrians use quantum connections to attack enemy brains directly. They create a link between their weapons and the minds of their targets. But I think we might be able to reverse the process. Morrison raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? If we can create our own quantum connection to their ships, we might be able to turn their mind weapons back on them, Blake explained. But we would need to modify our quantum torpedoes. To create the connection, Dr. Parker shook her head. That's incredibly dangerous. We would have to overload our own quantum systems to create a strong enough connection. The ship might not survive the process. Morrison looked around the table at his officers. They were good people who had families back on Earth. He had no right to ask them to risk their lives on such a desperate plan. But when he thought about the unconscious Alterian crews floating helplessly in space, he knew he had to try. I won't order anyone to stay for this, Morrison said. We can launch the lifeboats, and you can try to reach human space. But I'm going to attempt this plan whether I have help or not. Commander Garrett was the first to speak. I'm staying. Captain, the Alterians saved my brother's life during the Vega incident. I owe them. One by one, every officer in the room volunteered to stay. Lieutenant Blake wiped sweat from his forehead as he spoke. If we're going to do this, we need to move fast. I don't think the enemy will ignore us much longer. Morrison stood up. Then let's get to work. Blake, start modifying the quantum torpedoes. Parker, I need you to prepare our quantum core for overload. Garrett, ready all systems for combat. As his officers rushed to their tasks, Morrison remained in the briefing room for a moment. He looked out through the small window at the crystal ships gleaming in the distance. In a few hours, he would either save his friends or die trying. There was no middle ground. The Defiance began to glow with strange blue light as its quantum systems were pushed far beyond their design limits. Aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Keffer noticed the energy readings and frowned. The human ship was doing something unexpected, something that did not match any pattern in his experience. For the first time in 3 galaxies of conquest, Keffer felt a small touch of uncertainty, but he pushed the feeling aside. These humans were primitives with primitive technology. Whatever they were planning could not possibly threaten the might of the Zephyrian Empire. He would soon learn how wrong he was. The UN's defiance began to change in ways that no human ship had ever changed before. Blue light poured from every window and crack in the hull as the quantum systems overloaded according to plan. Captain Morrison felt the change in his bones. As reality twisted around his ship, Dr. Parker worked frantically at her station, watching numbers that should not exist. Captain, the quantum field is spreading beyond the ship. We're existing in 17 different states at the same time now. Morrison gripped his chair as the bridge seemed to flicker between different versions of itself. In some versions, the walls were glowing, in others his crew had different faces. But somehow, he remained himself in all of them. Status report, he called out, surprised that his voice sounded normal. Lieutenant Blake looked up from his communication station with wonder in his eyes. Sir, I can hear every radio transmission in the galaxy at once. The quantum field is connecting us to everything. And Captain, I think it's working. The Zephyrian ships are being pulled back into normal space. Through the main viewing screen, Morrison watched the enemy fleet with amazement. The crystal ships that had been shimmering and half invisible were now solid and real. They looked confused, turning in circles like animals that had lost their way home. Admiral, Keffer stared at his instrument panels in shock. Nothing made sense anymore. His ship's quantum systems were showing readings that violated every law of physics he knew. The human vessel had become something impossible, something that existed everywhere and nowhere at the same time. "Commander Velther, what is happening?" he demanded. His second officer was working desperately at her station, but her 4 arms were shaking. "Admiral, our dimensional phase systems have failed. We're being forced back into normal space. The human ship is creating some kind of quantum storm that's affecting our entire fleet." Keffer had conquered 3 galaxies, but he had never seen anything like this. The small human ship was glowing like a star, and every time he looked at it, it seemed to be in a different place. His temporal prediction systems, which had always shown him the future, were now showing only static. "Fire all weapons at the human ship," he ordered. "Destroy it before it can do more damage." 1,000 crystal ships turned their weapons toward the Defiance. Energy beams and mind rays shot across space, enough firepower to destroy a small moon. But every attack passed harmlessly through the human ship, as if it were made of light. Morrison watched the enemy weapons fire at his ship without fear. Somehow he knew they could not hurt him now. The quantum field around the Defiance made it exist in too many places at once for any single attack to find it. "Blake, can you reverse their mind weapons now?" he asked. The young communications officer nodded, his eyes glowing with the same blue light that filled the ship. "Yes, Captain. I can feel their quantum connections to their own crews. It's like turning their weapons backwards." "Do it." Blake pressed several buttons on his console, but Morrison could tell that the real work was being done by the quantum field itself. The field reached out across space like invisible hands, grabbing the Zephyrian mind weapons and spinning them around. Aboard the crystal ships, Zephyrian crews suddenly found their own weapons attacking their own minds. Confusion and fear spread through the fleet as soldiers who had never felt afraid began to panic. Officers who had always been confident started making mistakes, but the Defiance was just getting started. Commander Garrett had modified the ship's weapon systems to work with the quantum field. When she fired the first quantum torpedo, it did not travel through space like a normal missile. Instead, it appeared in 17 different places at once, striking 17 different enemy ships simultaneously. The crystal ships began to explode in bright flashes of light. Each quantum torpedo hit multiple targets because it existed in multiple realities. In one reality, it struck the engine of a Zephyrian cruiser. In another reality, it hit the weapons bay of a different ship. In a third reality, it destroyed the bridge of the enemy flagship. Admiral Keffer felt his ship shake as quantum torpedoes struck it from impossible angles. His crystal hull, which had never been damaged by any weapon, began to crack and break. Emergency alarms sounded throughout. The ship's systems failed one after another. "This is impossible," he whispered. "No species has ever developed quantum warfare technology." Commander Velther was trying to coordinate evacuations, but half the fleet was already destroyed or disabled. "Admiral, we must retreat. Our ships cannot fight an enemy that exists in multiple dimensions." But retreat was not possible. The quantum field from the human ship had created invisible chains that held the Zephyrian fleet in normal space. Every time a crystal ship tried to phase back into its other dimension, the quantum field pulled it back. Morrison watched the battle with a mixture of awe and horror. His ship was winning, but the cost was enormous. The quantum field was changing his crew in ways they did not yet understand. He could feel new thoughts in his mind, thoughts that belonged to other versions of himself in other realities. Dr. Parker called out a warning. "Captain, the quantum field is still growing. If we don't find a way to control it, it might spread across the entire galaxy." But Morrison was no longer entirely human. The quantum transformation had given him knowledge and abilities that no human had ever possessed. He could see the flow of time itself, could perceive the connections between all living things in the universe. "It's under control," he said calmly. "The field will only affect those who choose to fight against justice." Commander Garrett fired another spread of quantum torpedoes, and 50 more Zephyrian ships exploded simultaneously. The enemy fleet, which had seemed so powerful just hours before, was being destroyed by a single human vessel that had become something beyond normal understanding. Lieutenant Blake was monitoring communications from across the galaxy. "Captain, other species are hearing about this battle. The news is spreading faster than light. Everyone knows that the Zephyrian Empire can be defeated." Morrison nodded. This was bigger than just saving the Alterians. This was about showing the entire galaxy that bullies could be stopped, that empires built on fear could be brought down by courage and determination. Admiral Kefver's flagship was dying around him. Crystal walls were cracking, and blue quantum energy was seeping through the breaks. His crew was abandoning ship, but he remained on the bridge, trying to understand what had happened. A human voice spoke to him directly, somehow bypassing all his ship's communication systems. It was Captain Morrison, speaking with the power of the quantum field behind his words. "Your empire ends here," the voice said. "You conquered 3 galaxies because no one knew how to fight back. Now they do. Surrender your remaining ships and leave this galaxy forever, or face complete destruction." Kefver looked at his tactical display. Of his 3,000 ships, fewer than 200 remained functional. The others were destroyed, disabled, or drifting helplessly in space. His mighty fleet had been defeated by a single human vessel in less than 6 hours. For the first time in his long life, Admiral Kefver knew what it felt like to lose. The news of the great battle spread across 3 galaxies faster than anyone thought possible. On worlds that had surrendered to the Zephyrian Empire without a fight, people gathered around communication devices to hear the impossible story. A single human ship had defeated the entire Crystal Fleet that had conquered millions of star systems. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, but he was no longer the same man who had left human space just days before. The quantum transformation had changed him and his crew in ways they were still discovering. He could see things that existed in other dimensions. He could hear thoughts from across the galaxy. Most importantly, he could feel the hope spreading through the universe as oppressed peoples learned that their oppressors could be defeated. The Alterian defense fleet was awake again. As soon as the Zephyrian mind weapons stopped working, the unconscious crews had returned to normal. Captain Veldar of the Alterian flagship sent a message of gratitude that brought tears to Morrison's eyes. "Thank you, my human friend," the message said. "We thought we would never see our families again. You have given us back our freedom and our lives." But Morrison knew the victory was only the beginning. Across the 3 galaxies, millions of worlds remained under Zephyrian control. Local governors and administrators were still enforcing the Empire's laws. Resistance movements that had been crushed were beginning to reform, but they would need help. Lieutenant Blake, whose eyes still glowed with quantum energy, monitored communications from across known space. "Captain, I'm receiving messages from dozens of species. They're asking if the rumors are true. They want to know if humans will help them fight back against the Empire." Commander Garrett, who could now see multiple possible futures at the same time, studied her tactical displays. "Sir, there are Zephyrian garrison fleets in over 300 star systems. Most of them are smaller than the force we just defeated, but they're still dangerous to local populations." Dr. Parker was working to understand what had happened to them all. The quantum field had not just changed their ship, it had changed them as people. They were still human, but they were also something more. Something that could exist in multiple realities and manipulate the basic forces of the universe. "Captain," she reported, "I believe the transformation is permanent. We can control it now, but we'll never be completely normal again. The question is, what do we do with these new abilities? Morrison looked out at the stars through the main viewing screen. He could see not just the light from distant suns, but the quantum connections that linked all living things. He could feel the fear and hope of billions of people across 3 galaxies, all waiting to see what would happen next. Admiral Keffer sat in the emergency command center of his damaged flagship. Most of his fleet was destroyed or disabled. The few ships that remained functional were fleeing toward the edge of the galaxy as fast as their engines could carry them. For the first time in his people's history, the Zephyrian Empire was in full retreat. He sent a message to the Imperial capital 3 galaxies away. The message would take months to arrive, but he had to warn his government about what had happened. The humans had developed quantum warfare technology that made Zephyrian ships vulnerable. Worse, they seemed to be motivated by something the Empire had never encountered before: the desire to help others without expecting anything in return. The message was simple: the 4th galaxy cannot be conquered. Recommend immediate withdrawal of all forces. The humans fight not just for themselves, but for everyone. Meanwhile, on Earth, the human government was receiving reports that seemed impossible to believe. A single patrol ship had somehow defeated an alien empire that controlled 3 entire galaxies. The reports claimed that Captain Morrison and his crew had been transformed into beings with godlike powers. President Maria Santos called an emergency meeting of the World Council. Representatives from every nation on Earth gathered to discuss what this meant for humanity's future. Some wanted to send more ships to help Morrison. Others worried that the quantum transformation might be dangerous to normal humans. But across human space, other captains were making the same choice that Morrison had made. When they heard about alien empires oppressing innocent people, they volunteered to help. Scientists worked around the clock to understand and reproduce the quantum transformation that had made the Defiant so powerful. Captain Morrison sent a message to Earth, his voice carrying across the galaxy through quantum connections that normal radio could never achieve. This is Jake Morrison of the UNS Defiance. I want everyone to know that we are still human, still loyal to Earth and everything we believe in. But we have also become something new. We have become protectors of the innocent, guardians of freedom. For all species. The message continued. Any world that is oppressed, any people who cry out for help, any species that faces extinction from bullies and tyrants, we will come to your aid. The age of easy conquest is over. The age of universal justice has begun. Within weeks, other human ships began undergoing quantum transformation. The process was dangerous, and not everyone survived it, but those who did became part of something unprecedented in galactic history. A fleet of ships that existed in multiple dimensions, crewed by humans who had gained abilities beyond normal understanding. The Zephyrian Empire tried to adapt to this new threat. They developed new weapons and tactics specifically designed to fight quantum-enhanced enemies. But every time they thought they had found a solution, the humans evolved their technology further. More importantly, the humans were not fighting alone anymore. Species across 3 galaxies were rising up against their oppressors, inspired by the example of one small ship that had refused to surrender. Resistance movements that had been broken were rebuilding stronger than before. Admiral Keffer, commanding one of the last Zephyrian fleets still in the Milky Way, sent a final message to Captain Morrison before retreating into deep space. "You have doomed the galaxy to chaos," he transmitted. "Without the Empire to maintain order, these species will destroy each other in endless wars." Morrison's reply was broadcast on every frequency across known space, ensuring that every intelligent being in 3 galaxies would hear it. "We don't want to rule anyone. We don't want to build an empire. We just want to give everyone the chance to be free. What they do with that freedom is up to them." The message ended with words that would be remembered for thousands of years. The universe is big enough for everyone to find their own way. But it's not big enough for bullies who think might makes right. We are humanity, and we will never stop fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves. As the Defiance set course for the next system that needed help, Morrison thought about the long road ahead. There were still millions of oppressed worlds across 3 galaxies. There were still tyrants who believed that the strong should rule the weak. The work would never be truly finished, but for the first time since intelligent life had begun reaching for the stars, the galaxy knew that somewhere out there, someone was watching over the innocent. The age of empires built on fear was ending, and the age of hope was just beginning.